The King of the Battlefield Chapter 261. Someone was looking at me. Sponsored content. B. Susie suddenly had that thought. Although she looked around, she could not find anyone who was secretly watching her. What's going on? B. Susie's sensory perception was on a different level than others since she was little. Even recognized by Myung, those advanced senses had saved B. Susie's life several times. Especially after she had obtained the lineage of light from the Sky Library, that power has increased. When she had briefly borrowed Myung's power in the past, she had felt as if she had become a god. That sensation still remained inside B. Susie. And the power, which has reached its maximum level, was telling her that she must trust her senses. Who is it? She was curious. She was curious as to who would be watching her in secrecy in a frenzied situation like this. Above all, she felt no presence of hostility from her senses. Rather, she felt a sense of affection. Affection? Let's find this person. Feeling that she couldn't lose the person like this, B. Susie quickly utilized a flying skill. She was confident when it came to speed. It was not an exaggeration to say that no one has ever escaped from B. Susie's pursuit. Sponsored content. Her maximum speed was near supersonic level. However, the one she chased with her senses hit himself even faster. She went to the top of the cathedral, but found no one. There is a trace of teleportation magic. However, using magic alone couldn't escape her. This opponent was underestimating B. Susie. After having had assimilated with Myung, B. Susie's sensory perceptions have already reached beyond anyone's imagination. It was like when the King of Fighting Wang had mastered everything about the Mystery Moon sect. The word genius wasn't even good enough to describe B. Susie. As a result, she was able to use the sight that could see the traces of magic, and the movements of the magic power. Whoever you are, won't it be fun playing hide and seek with me? B. Susie, too, became unyielding. To turn back at this point wasn't like B. Susie at all. B. Susie's creed was finish what was started. Behind such a character stood Myung, but to her credit, B. Susie was able to come this far without giving up. B. Susie chased after the scent of mana. And when she was about to reach the source of the scent, the target disappeared again. B. Susie was impressed as the situation repeated several times. A powerful sorcerer. His spell casting time is close to 0. It was a well-known fact that it takes a while to initiate teleportation magic for an ordinary sorcerer. Or that there was a limitation as to how many times it could be initiated. Sponsored content. These limitations did not seem to apply to the sorcerer that she was after. They said the great sorcerer Merlin has come to the great city. Has he come here? Although she might have been tired, B. Susie did not quit. Getting interesting. It was becoming interesting for her. It was as if she had traveled back in time to her childhood. There was some sense of having fun just like when she had run around with her childhood friends. The opponent also seemed to be keeping pace with B. Susie, as well. The hide and seek continued until the sun was setting. Perhaps, impressed by the tenacity, at some point in time, the pattern of magic has changed. B. Susie tilted her head. Now, that running away isn't working, he has decided to entice me. The width and length of the entire territory of Malalan might have been covered in this game of hide and seek. Then all of a sudden, he was moving underground. Knowing fully that B. Susie was after him, it dared B. Susie to approach. Although it was a provocation, B. Susie felt like she was being enticed. Perhaps it was because she had eaten sweets earlier, that she decided to be entertained. Shov. Sponsored content. The underground sewers. B. Susie ran on top of the flowing water. She had, long ago, mastered the level of flying skill which allowed her to not fall into the water. Even though she was able to run in the air, she didn't need to be flying around in such a limited space. How long has it been since she has been moving in that fashion? Someone is here. She felt a presence. The cross-junction of the underground sewers. There was someone on the other side of the wall. It was the moment that she could finally see the end of, after almost half a day of the game of hide and seek. Susie approached cautiously. As the unknown opponent was an incredible sorcerer, she could not let her guard down. Having come into a certain range, she quickly stopped. A man, wearing a black robe over his body, was standing at the cross-junction. And as soon as she saw the person, Susie shook all over. The eyes that appeared to be like the Apollyon. She couldn't have forgotten it. You are. Leave Malalan. A low voice rumbled inside of Susie's ears. She was certain that it was the lich that was with Myung. Why are you here? You need not know. Didn't need to know? And immediately telling her to leave didn't seem fair. Above all, why hadn't he just left Susie high and dry? With the skills that this lich had, he could have escaped from my chase 100 times over. No matter how advanced Susie's flying skill was, it was no match for the lich who had once battled against the Demon King Enrith. Come to think of it, a strange memory lingered on. That day. The day when she had assimilated with Myung, and faced Enrith. Susie was captured, and finally lost her consciousness. However, under a very blurry vision, she remembered seeing the lich who was before her. Whether it was real or not wasn't certain though. But, his affectionate eyes, for some reason, remained in her memory. And it was the same this time around. If, indeed, it was the lich who was watching her with affection, and who played hide and seek as if he wanted to play with her, then why? Chapter 262. Susie shook her head. I wasn't sure before, but now I am. Why did you save me? I had no value after being captured by Enrith. That was, no value in saving me by risking yourself. Was I not a bother? In fact, the lich had treated Susie as a burden. Yet, he saved Susie at the end. Choosing to self-destruct, he separated Enrith from Susie. His gaze on Susie, for some reason, seemed urgent, sentimental, and longing. Susie hasn't even once forgotten that gaze even now. Who are you? I'm a ghost. My master's shadow. You do not need to be involved in the matter at hand. My master would not want that either. Myung? He has never once told me to stop. Not even once. Myung was an excuse. When danger struck, facing it head-on was who Myung was. Myung was telling Susie to run? Myung wasn't someone who would talk that way without any reasonable explanation. In one word, it was an excuse. The lich was making an excuse. It's been always that way since the beginning. Although I have never seen you, and that even you were a lich, my heart pounded. It wasn't affection, but certainly it was something close, or maybe even a higher emotion than that, and it surprised me. It was always that way, no matter how you treated me, or distanced yourself from me. Who are you? Susie had a very complicated expression on her face. It was the one question that she could never shake off. It would be easier if it was affection. Just affection, that was. However, I wasn't. This pounding of her heart, it was a sense of longing, and poignancy. Lich. Seungmin was silent. Wouldn't even he want to reveal himself? Would he not want to say that you are my daughter? However, look at his appearance. There was no warmth in his body, he was dead. The ever so shabby-looking self, without even a single piece of flesh on him. Sponsored content. Leave. You cannot stay in this war. Seungmin grabbed his staff. Shwing. Sharp wind has blown towards Susie like sharp saw teeth. She tried to dodge it, but her shoulder has been penetrated through at once. Plop. Wait, wait. Susie could not continue her words. She fell, losing her consciousness. Seungmin looked upon the fallen Susie. To prevent small bugs or other things from even approaching close, he has established a barrier, and even placed several magic spells, so that B. Susie's body temperature would remain steady. A month from now, B. Susie would be able to crack this barrier and come out of it herself. You have to live. As he had incorporated very strong sleep spell, she won't be able to wake up for at least a month from now. B. Seungmin gazed on B. Susie for a while, then turned away. Much needed to be done. It was exactly 3 days since B. Seungmin had left. Splash! Splash! Someone approached with the sound of splashing water. What the heck, wasn't it here? No one is here. Sponsored content. A small fairy, riding a black horse, said in an angry tone. He. Black horse, this is the right place? But, it isn't here. Did you just lie to us? Heeing. No? It's here? Well, as far as we can tell, there is one girl here, I see. And strangely, my dear husband's scent is here, too. Sniff, sniff. Wahi, the fairy, approached the established barrier sniffing like a dog. Although shielded within the barrier, she was clearly visible to the eyes of the hell horse and Wahi. Then looking at B. Susie who was inside the barrier, they tilted their heads. I smell the scent of my dear husband from this girl. Could it be an affair? Wahi, pouting her lips, closely examined B. Susie. Muyung's scent was rather strong. It was so because B. Susie and Muyung had once assimilated, but Wahi could not know that. The reason even for the hell horse to have made a mistake was exactly because of that reason, too. And Wahi has never met B. Susie before. Bah, my dear husband must have taken in a new woman when Wahi wasn't around. Heeing. The hell horse laughed at her. Many women will follow strong man. Even the hell horse, being called the king of the unicorns, spent time with hundreds of mares. However, no one ever complained. That was because the hell horse was the king there. What? Geez, all men are the same. Wahi crossed her arms while spitting out many of the familiar curses. Hey, black horse, let's take this girl, too. I'm going to question him, will it be her or Wahi? Heeing. Sponsored content. The hell horse tilted his head once again. It would be simple to just kill her and leave the body there if she didn't like the girl. However, Wahi didn't want to leave the girl who might, somehow, have some sort of relationship with Muyung. The hell horse thought that Wahi lived a complicated life. There was an emergency. Demon tribes have surrounded Gremari's temple where the opposition forces have gathered. They numbered close to 10 million, but the tension level has reached the maximum point. Why is he here? Is he going to break the non-aggression pact? That was such an opponent that showed up here. The ground that he walked on was rotted and turned black. His breath was a fetid green, virulent with pestilence. It was like he was indeed the personification of death, the Grim Reaper, harvester of souls. And countless number of monsters and undead lurked behind him. The king of the dead. Why did the one of the 4 transcendental lords that ruled the north come here? Even though there were 5 demon gods, the king of the dead was no pushover. However, why was he here? There was a plan of congregating the transcendental beings, but that was supposed to happen in the future. B. Seungmin and Han Sung, the Lord of Dragons, were supposed to make it happen. However, he came without anyone calling for him. While leading the countless undead. Oh, King of the Dead, go back. Or you will regret it. Muru, who was the most belligerent one, stepped forward. However, the King of the Dead did not even glance at Muru. His sight was only fixed at one person, Muyung. Muyung creased his forehead. Although he wasn't sure that the bastard's intent was him, he couldn't figure out why he had shown up without even getting called upon. However, the bastard was certainly calling for Muyung. Therefore, Muyung stepped forward as the King of the Dead wanted him to do. You've some business with me. My God has led me to you. An immediate response. However, it was a surprise that the king of the dead was a devout believer. Even a being like you follow a god. I follow the same god you follow. Myung follows a god? It was the first time such thing was being said. Myung does not have a blind faith in a god. In fact, he could be called the ultimate atheist. Believed in God? As Myung was feeling strange, the king of the dead continued. Art news. The true mighty one of death who has blessed you. Death Lord. His true name was uttered from the lips of the dead. Chapter 263. It was a completely unexpected situation. The transcendental being, the king of the dead, who rules the north, and the Death Lord were involved. He and the king of the dead were similar as their power was based on death. Myung, too, has completely harnessed the Death Lord's power as his own. For this reason, Myung felt some level of familiarity with the king even though the transcendental beings were both wary and antagonistic, so it didn't appear to have been just a simple mistake. However, Death Lord was in the darkness. How did Death Lord, who was a being in the darkness, come in contacts with the king of the dead? Why were you sent here by Artanis? Myung could not resist asking. If he has come to help, then that would be the best response. It was because one of the most difficult transcendental beings was the king of the dead. We are to battle using only the art of death. My God has said that he would cast out the loser. However, what the king of the dead has said was unexpected. The end of the art of death meant combat. Sponsored content. Then, the king of the dead was someone who also used the art of death. It was hard to believe that there was another one besides Myung, who had the same power. Renounced by the Death Lord. Myung fell into a deep thought. As a matter of fact, the king of the dead was famous for isolation. Even when the demon gods were going berserk, or when other transcendental beings would come forth, the king of the dead did not make any moves from the high, cold mountains of the north. Because of that, the North Mountains were a territory that could not be attacked. However, it was someone who was solitary who had shown up where Myung was. That was how badly the Death Lord's power was coveted. I accept. There was no reason to not accept it. Of course, there was a high possibility that the loser of this battle would become whatever the winner wished. Perhaps, it was possible that the loser would be brought back as an undead. However, Myung was confident. Sponsored content. At least, Myung was confident when it came to art. Of course, Myung wouldn't be the only one who was confident. The king of the dead, too, of course. Every one of the dead that he has brought with him was unusual. Maybe, it was him who was keeping the tradition of Death Lord, rather than Myung. That was, the ability to maximize the strength using the ingredients. However, Myung valued the narratives. No one knew for sure who would come out as the victor when their skills were completely different. The rules of the battle are simple. Using the same material, it would be who is able to create greater art. It was art only in words as it really meant the battle of who was able to create the more powerful death. It was important to determine the standards in judging that creation, but it was worth a fight should the rules be applied fairly. I also have a condition. Myung spoke, breaking a short silence. Accepting the challenge was the natural thing to do, but accepting it on its face value alone was foolish. Sponsored content. Even more so in a situation like this. Speak. The king of the dead was carefree. It was as if he felt that his victory was obvious. Certainly, if he had been anointed with the art of death from Death Lord, he would have been using that power much longer than Myung has. On the other hand, the time that Myung has spent on mastering the art of death was much shorter. He would hear Myung out. Myung spoke as he looked around the area. I want to change the venue. Our art is not something to be seen by others. The demon gods and demon tribes. Everyone was looking at the two of them. However, the power associated with the art of death was one of Myung's secret weapons. As the powers of Lucifer and the Archangel Gabriel were revealed, at least he wanted to keep this one a secret. The demon gods did not know what this battle called art was about. Besides, both the King of the Dead and Weung had already passed the point where it required a third party's evaluation. There probably wasn't anyone there who understood that, either. That was, other than the King of the Dead and Weung. That's appropriate. The King of the Dead has accepted the request. He then swung his sickle. Shriek. As the sickle was swung, a black hole appeared next to him. Enter. No one will interrupt us in here. The King of the Dead entered through the hole, alone. It was an unspoken pressure put on Weung for him to also follow, alone. Weung, I'll go with you. Takan tried to dissuade him. The motive of appearing suddenly and leading him away seemed suspicious. However, Weung just shook his head. No, I must go alone. Chapter 264. Weung had intended to take everything from Death Lord and also gain the King of the Dead. Cheating did not occur to him. The only solution was to face it head-on. He came of his own volition. I should face it personally, by myself. He walked towards the black hole. Then the underlings of the King of the Dead surrounded Weung. They were determined to not let anyone else enter through the hole. Even the demon gods could not move hastily. It seemed as if the King of the Dead has brought all of his troops with him. By looking purely at the numbers, they were as many as there were demons. Of course, if they were to engage in direct confrontation, the demon gods would be superior, but they would still suffer significant damages. It was because every one of the undead were the personal creations of the King of the Dead. I'll be right back. As soon as Weung entered the hole. Whirl. Sponsored content. The black hole disappeared without a trace. It was a feeding ground. The dungeon was filled with crying monsters in cages. I've captured them for this battle. From the lowest of the goblins, to the highest of the dragons. If any of the ingredients are needed, you may use them at will. The King of the Dead said as if he was being generous. The dungeon was much more spacious than anyone could have imagined, and there were monsters that Weung has never seen before. It looked as if all the monsters of the demon world were kept there. Impressive. Not only by the sheer numbers, but he was awed by the fact that this many types were collected. Weung walked around the feeding ground. The ranks of the monsters rose higher as Weung walked towards the end, and dragons were positioned at the end. Fire dragon, water dragon, earth dragon, light dragon. Even those legendary ones like Phoenix and Griffin. What should I make? Sponsored content. That will be assigned by Artanis. The Death Lord will tell us that himself? It was then. The words that appeared before his eyes. They were different than the usual writings. It was an incredibly bad writing, as if the Death Lord had scrawled it himself. Although he did not appear in person, it was obvious that this, too, was considered a test. Chimera. The King of the Dead began to move as if he had anticipated it to a certain level. He then moved to collect the needed ingredients from the cages. This battle, I'm at a disadvantage. The feeding ground was spacious. Sponsored content. It was as big as a good-sized city. To prepare this type of facility in the dungeon was incredible, but what was more important was that the King of the Dead knew precisely where everything was located. Truly, this was a disadvantageous fight. It could never be fair. Yet, it wasn't possible to halt a fight that has already started. And all this while, the clock was ticking. Craw! Craw! The Phoenix was chosen first by him. Phoenix and the Fire Dragon. It was obvious from the get-go that he wanted to make the top-level chimera by using the best ingredients. Was he going to make a fire god? Chimera, the collective being of countless number of monsters. It was a difficult task. Unlike the simple undead, making a chimera was a complex process, as it was done by putting together the strengths of many monsters. However, there was a possibility of side effects if, for instance, inharmonious bodies were forcibly fused together. The combination also needed to be considered carefully. Certainly, good ingredients were helpful in creating a good chimera. Even though this was an unshakable truth, it was somewhat different than what Myung wanted. Myung walked over to the cage of an orc lord with red feather. The orc lord seemed to have some sort of a story. "What is your name?" Myung tried to engage in a conversation. The king of the dead could not understand what Myung was up to. For over 24 hours, Myung has been talking with the monsters. There were nearly 10,000 monsters in the feeding ground. Was he going to talk to every one of them? Cannot understand. It was getting harder and harder to understand as time went by. At any rate, the art of death was the power of control. The undead becomes absolutely obedient when it was created by the power of control. The prior memory and spirit would both vanish into thin air. Even having them was useless. It was better to come up with a better combination by using better ingredients. There was not enough time even to think about it, yet all that Myung did was converse like a madman. What was more surprising was the fact that the monsters were responding to Myung's conversations. Being able to assimilate, or perhaps, share emotions. Myung had such capabilities. However, they were skills which were useless in making a chimera. Chapter 265. Has he given up? He probably knew it from the beginning. That this battle was absolutely unfair against him. However, there was no intention of going easy. Equality did not exist in the true sense, in this world. Going around, screaming for equality only made one become an easy prey. The king of the dead stopped thinking. Instead, he kept his focus on his own creation. The embodiment of fire. I'll make the monster of monsters that burn up everything. The phoenix that was born of the hottest fire, the fire dragon that had the authority over fire, fire tar, the fire giant, and the fire spirit of the highest level were combined. Was that all? Then the essences were extracted, from all the collected monsters, having the characteristics of fire. Then a heart would be made by compressing hundreds of those extracted essences. Then place the hide of gigantes, which was supposed to have the toughest skin, as the outer layer, and overlaid it with magic that induce fire energy, allowing it to blaze even more with fire mana. Then imbue it with all the skill learned from making undead. He dared to believe that he would definitely create the most powerful creation of all time. The king of the dead did not try to hide that process. It was possible because he was certain of his victory even if Myung was to make a chimera with the characteristics of water. If not, he intended to put him in despair before then. However, Myung did not give up, nor was in despair. He did not even give looks over at the monsters having water elements. Myung continued his conversations even after the 60th hour of the 72 hours. At this rate, it could have been easily concluded that he did not have the will to make a chimera. Rather than being an artist of death, he might as well be close friend to the monsters, perhaps. It's practically done. However, exactly right after the 62nd hour, Myung's activities have changed. With 10 more hours to go, Myung has stopped conversing with the monsters. The 10,000 or so monsters had 10,000 stories. But, it was impossible to collect all those stories. Instead, it was possible to choose a theme and resolve them in Myung's own way. The subject this time around is Han. Han. We call sorrow, resentment, regret, and sadness as Han. Myung gathered those filled with Han. He didn't take the monsters' ranks into consideration, at all. How big was the Han, how desperate and regrettable they were. Myung had assimilated with them. So, he was able to tell how big their Hans were. The demon dragon was the one that had the biggest Han of them all. Furthermore, it was a very scrubby-looking demon dragon at that. It was a severely impoverished-looking dragon that if it was to die, no one would think anything of it. Born of the darkness, the dragon was cursing the world itself. I was abandoned from the moment of my birth. I was betrayed, used, and lost everything. My skin was torn, teeth were broken, and my entire body was repeatedly destroyed and regenerated. I dare to curse the world even after I die. I will even curse the god that gave me birth. The demon dragon was able to barely retaining his life by only eating despair and curses. Even the other dragons refused to give a kind look at the miserable dragon. As a matter of fact, they evaded it as if it was filthy. Muyong has chosen him. Muyong undoubtedly believed that it would be the core of his work. You will be reborn as new. You will spew out your loathing towards the world. No one will be able to ignore you, and no one will be able to stop your loathing. Cursed and curse again. Despair and despair again. That Han will become a strong driving force that will lead to the birth of a strong emotion. Muyong gathered all their Han. Even for Muyong, who was the creator, the gathered Han became so overwhelming that it led to harnessing an incredible force. If Muyong hasn't been able to overcome his limitations many times, he would have been drowned in that Han. Muyong did not even assign any particular form to them. Only that, by fusing and fusing again, he has created them into a great spirit of evil. And finally, that great spirit of evil began to take a shape on its own. Muyong granted his magic power to that and overlaid it with Lucifer's power. The spirit of evil grew in size on its own. The yin energy has reached the most extreme level. Burning red, that form grew horn and spread its wings. Finally, Kohuowung. The two pairs of red wings stretched out immensely. The horrendous-looking teeth and rough, red pupils. The great monster, which was wearing a skeleton armor and shimmering with the power of curse, has been completed before Muyong's eyes. Chapter 266. The Transcendental Beings, 8. Crimson Balrog. Muyong has already had a run-in with an ordinary Balrog. Enrose. The monster that was let loose in order to threaten his territory. It was B. Suzy, the one connected to Muyong, who defeated the monster, but the power of a Balrog was beyond imagination. Even B. Sungmin had a tough time, and it was only after the support from B. Suzy, who was connected to Muyong, that the monster had been taken care of. The Balrog was a monster that even many of the demon kings would dare to face. But then that Crimson Balrog? A form that was shaped by integrating every kind of hatred, and resentment was as scarlet as blood. Even at a quick glance, it did not come across as an ordinary Balrog. Krrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr fearful shriek. Kvwaak! Gawk! Krung! Krung! Every monster went mad. They cringed in fear of Crimson Balrog. What was more surprising was the fact that even members of a dragon race of the highest rank were included among them. Dragon! An archaic race with strong pride. They screamed loudly. Even at the mere appearance of Crimson Balrog, they were trembling with fear. Then the Crimson Balrog looked at Muyung. The resentment and hatred towards the world was being directed at Muyung as well. I am your master. Pug! It was in a blink of an eye. One of Muyung's arms was sliced off. The Crimson Balrog attacked Muyung. Krrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr was his master. It appeared as if he would strike out at anyone in his hatred. Muyeong put a smile on his face. Divine blessing. The detached arm has instantly been restored. There wasn't much damage. Muyeong allowed the attack on purpose. Muyeong knew very well of the demon dragon's hatred, the resentment of a bastard. Is that all you've got? Did you not say that you would curse the world? Go ahead. Vent out all your resentments. Crimson Balrog looked into Muyeong's eyes. Muyeong did not avoid those eyes. He only prepared to absorb the attacks that Crimson Balrog was about to launch at him. At the same time, he has even chastised the Balrog. Do your best. Clearly choose the target of your resentment. It was like screaming. A howling. However, it was like a movements of a baby in the end. It was because his rage had started from the fact that no one has ever paid attention to him. The scariest thing in the world was apathy. Kong. Muyoung's body levitated in the air. Kwang. Crimson Balrog struck down Muyoung. Immediately, penetrating through the surface, Muyoung's body was buried deep into the ground. Red particles gushed out of Crimson Balrog's mouth. With that single attack, Muyoung was buried deep underground several thousand feet. However, Muyoung wasn't dead. Tudug. Tudug. Muyoung re-emerged out of the gigantic hole. His entire body was a wreck, but his body was whole. When it came to recovering physical body, the divine blessing skill level came close to being perfect. Unless an impact which was beyond the healing range of the skill was delivered, Muyoung would continue to regenerate. You're a long ways away. Your resentment cannot reach me. Be more angry. Curse more. Ho-ho-oh. Shwing. After spewing out his own blood, Crimson Balrog made a sword out of it. Then he sliced Muyoung's body into two halves. Impressive. The fact that this much impact could be delivered to Muyoung, who has attained half divinity, with invincible skin, only emphasized Crimson Balrog's power. And the skill which turned his own blood into a sword. Had he attacked Muyoung without any hesitation, it would have even put Muyoung in danger. However, he was indecisive. It was because, like Muyoung, there has never been anyone who would openly accept his resentments. The reason for his rage and resentment was due to extreme apathy and utter contempt. No one has ever shown interest, and even if there was someone who had shown interest, that person would avoid him as if one was encountering something contemptible. Anyone who had approached him has shown smile if he was useful, but once that usefulness dissipated, they had tossed him to the side without any hesitation. However, Muyoung was different. Muyoung's interest was only focused on Crimson Balrog. Without good or evil, he was just accepting of Crimson Balrog's bratty behavior. Bratty behavior. That was right. It was just bratty behavior. Look at me, please pay attention to me, that was what this bratty behavior was all about. And Muyoung was paying him exactly the right attention that he has been asking for. His body was torn and regenerated for a countless number of times. Even for Muyoung, exhausting his power at this level could be risky. However, Muyoung did not give up. He tried all he could to hear his story until the end. I even knew a person like that. Muyoung. This name was not his in the first place. It was because Muyoung had the name of Yu Young in the past. If he hadn't met the true Muyoung, his original personality Yu Young while he was training to be an executioner, he would have lost his sense of self early on, and could not even have come back to the past. Muyoung, at this moment, knew as well as anyone as to how comforting it was to the Crimson Balrog in just listening to his story. After how many times has it repeated? Kray, krat. The Crimson Balrog plopped down and sat on the ground. And he sobbed. Sadness. Just sadness. As if he had become a child, he sobbed. Muyoung approached him. Although he felt like his body was being torn apart, all of his magical powers were exhausted and he had been pushed to his limits, he just wanted to tell him a few simple words. You are no longer alone. And right at that moment, Soul Companion effect is maximized. B+S+. Chapter 267. They were awesome statistics. Even if there weren't any additional stats, the status window showed the powers that come close to B Seungman's. Who would have thought that the base stats would be strengthened by a percentage? The skills, or even the base stats, there were nothing to throw away. At this level, even Enrose would not be a match. He dared to say that this was the most powerful monster ever. Muyoung smiled with satisfaction. I'll leave it to you now. This type of exhaustion was felt for the first time in a long while. The feeling that his own body was not like his own. Was it because he has been torn apart and regenerated a countless number of times? Kray? Crimson Balrog shook. Perhaps, he was more surprised to have such feelings for the first time. His consciousness became blurred. Myung spoke the final words as he closed his eyes. The words that would turn everything upside down. I trust you. Plop. The king of the dead sneered and laughed internally. You have created something quite great, but it was unexpected. He did not anticipate that something like that would be created. He has created the form of Crimson Balrog by integrating every form of resentment. It was a unique monster that might appear and might not appear, at the same time, like Chimera. However, the problem was from that point on. Krrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr It was an embarrassment to have created such a monster that listened to no one for someone who was competing in the art of death. The creation that he had himself made did not listen to him. But then the bastard went a step further. It's gone mad. By foregoing defense, he was taking all the attacks without any resistance. No matter how great the level was, even for Muyeong, taking such hits would be risky. It was like an act of suicide. I'm the victor of this battle. The king of the dead turned his head. Although it wasn't sitting well with him for winning for doing almost nothing, it wasn't something that he would reject. As the bastard has voluntarily walked towards death, the king of the dead just needed to seize the victory at leisure. And not too long after, he has completed his creation. The fire beast, the shape of fire, itself. Huowoong. Huowoong. Would the god of fire be like this? The assembled fire was flaring up like active volcano. The essence and spirit of fire, it was a harmonious creation from combining the fire monsters. However, it wasn't just a fire. Even hell fire wouldn't come close. The fire that destroys everything. The king of the dead was satisfied. The level of its completion was in the top 3 among his creations of all time. However, as far as purity was concerned, nothing came close. The fire in its extremity ignores all attributes. Did they say that Ors, the fire demon god, was destroyed with fire by Diablo? He had an idea from that story. Even though he was a ruler of the northern region, he was well aware of everything that was going on in the demon world. And what certainly has attracted him was the appearance of Diablo. Was it possible to destroy the fire demon god with fire? However, he thought that it was possible as he gazed upon what has just been created. This fire that has been strengthened to the ultimate, and thus became pure, would crush every lesser fire. No foe was to be feared at this level of completion. No matter how awesome a monster this bastard created, it would be rendered useless before this fire beast. The king of the dead was confident. There could be no defeat. For someone like himself, who has trained for several hundred years in the art of death, it was impossible for him to lose to someone who had an embarrassingly low level of training in the same skill. I believe. The king of the dead looked at his foe. It's done. At that moment, Muyeong fell to the ground. It was truly a foolish move. That lump of curse would not listen to him no matter what. The monster that has piled up curses and resentments. Even the king of the dead had made such things many times. And the result was always the same. By cursing itself and cursing the world, it would lead to self-destruction in the end. That is after destroying everything in its vicinity. It can never be controlled. The king of the dead was certain. He will die. If he has fallen, that will be the end. He could not even regenerate as he has fully exhausted himself. Even if that monster, in the form of Balrog, was to step on Muyeong, he would die slowly without being able to do anything. However, that was supposed to be, but... Kwang! Crimson Balrog turned his body. Kwang! Kwang! And then it walked towards the fire beast which the king of the dead has created. What? It was unbelievable. Has he put the monster that was formed only with resentment under his control? Even the mad, reckless behavior needed to be rethought. Certainly. The king of the dead has readjusted his assessment of Muyeong at a higher level. However, it was no use. It has been about 10 hours since that Balrog has been created. The level of completion would certainly not be high. Oh, fire beast, burn him. Do not leave even ashes. Ho-o-o-wong. The fire beast flared up even bigger, the fires which shrouded his body. Kwa. And the crimson Balrog rushed in to launch an attack. Kwaong. The fire beast withstood the crimson Balrog's attack. However, a big hole was made on the ground. Crimson Balrog did not fear the flames that the fire beast had at all. Instead, he grabbed the neck of the fire beast with both hands and bit it. Huwoong. Huwoong. Flaring up even more, the fire beast's flames engulfed the crimson Balrog's body. However, there was not the slightest movement on the part of crimson Balrog. Instead, the fire beast's arm was bitten off. As the attack became more extreme with more power, the body of the crimson Balrog began to explode, unable to withstand the horrifying heat. Krrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr Crimson Balrog. The fire that was engulfing Crimson Balrog was instantly blown away by the sheer fury of that scream. Quang! 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 After putting the fire beast to the ground, Crimson Balrog began to throw punches with both hands as if he has gone mad. With every punch thrown, the ground shook, and the facilities that had been strengthened with magic have become demolished. The King of the Dead stood agape, unable to comprehend. What Crimson Balrog showed Muyang was infinitely charming. It would be believable even to say that the Crimson Balrog had the appearance of a very strong demon god, based on the power that has been demonstrated just now. How? Blood came flowing out of the hands of the Crimson Balrog. The blood formed the shape of a sword, and holding one sword in each hand, Crimson Balrog slashed the fire beast as if he had gone mad. It was gruesome. The King of the Dead has never seen such a gruesome scene. Even though it was a monster of integrated curse, its purpose was to follow Muyang's instructions to the end. Crimson Balrog stopped only after the fire beast's body has been squashed, torn to pieces, and its head was cut off. And it let out a victorious scream. It happened in a blink of an eye. The King of the Dead uttered in a delirious manner. How can this be? Chapter 268. Chapter 257. The Transcendental Beings, End. Death Lord had been watching what has been unfolding from the beginning. Having left the darkness, he was, at one time, active in the demon world, and more recently, had taught the one called the King of the Dead. Afterwards, the King of the Dead had been able to establish the foundation of a transcendental being, but he could not influence the Death Lord's mind. Kingslayer, is this what you saw? Muyang's way was very crude. It was different, dangerous, and unconventional. What of that? The Death Lord saw the possibilities from that. Seeing and feeling things that which have not been seen or felt before, he could, somehow, understood them when he saw Muyang. It was possible that Kingslayer realized this side of Muyang. Therefore, Kingslayer had bet all of his hopes on Muyang. That was on Muyang, who had endless possibilities. This is not an undead. What was more surprising was the very essence of the Crimson Balrog. Even though he was born, filled with resentment and curses, there was overwhelming life force unlike the undead. How could there be such life force from the entity that had such extreme yin from the beginning? It was as if he had been revived from the dead. Death Lord of the past had wanted to create true life. He despaired because he couldn't do it, and he had lost the possibility when he became a lich himself. However, Muyang's way has given him a new beginning. It was as if was teaching Death Lord that there existed a way, such as this. Create life with death. No, transcend a story into life. Death Lord trembled. It was on a different level than any other undead that Muyang has made so far. It was a true work of the art, created by Muyang, who has attained semi-divinity, and numerous enlightenments. This was a beginning. It was simple, yet the method was never simple. Perhaps. However, it wasn't exquisite. That was strength, and yet, it was also a weakness. If the experience of Death Lord was to be added, Muyong would attain the power of death, and the true power of creation. Death Lord became certain. That was, the certainty that by being able to leap beyond his own level, Muyong would be able to step into the territory that Death Lord wasn't able to reach. Oh, Artanis! This duel is a mistake. The method of using that power is sinister and blasphemous, so, I, respectfully, ask you to reconsider. The King of the Dead begged when the fire beast fell. He insisted that Muyong's art was wrong. I'm the traditional one who wields the power of death. I am the only one who can maximize this art. The King of the Dead knew well that Death Lord was looking into this space. Truly, the King of the Dead was much like Death Lord. That was, he could be called a traditionalist. Everything, starting with that method, was following the way of Death Lord. So, his limitations were very clear. More than anything, the King of the Dead didn't like to go out beyond the boundaries. After establishing a place in the north, he was just happy to be living while ruling the territory. That was the reason as to why Death Lord has ignored the King of the Dead until now. On the other hand, how about Muyong? Face head-on and be victorious. That was the reason that naturally attracted attention to Muyong. Winner and loser have already been determined. If you are not going to surrender, your soul will be burned and I'll make a puppet out of you. The King of the Dead shuddered. His soul was in the hands of Death Lord. Although he had been endowed with much benefits, with a single word from Death Lord, his soul would be wandering about the netherworld. Follow him. Then you will learn the reason for your defeat. Do you think he can truly see the highest art? I'm not sure, either. However, he is the only unique one who has a chance. Death Lord accepted. That was, the fact that Kingslayer has placed a hope on Muyong. He felt that, too. That only Muyong could take care of this irrationality, this confusion. At the same time, Death Lord probably understood his own limitations. In fact, it didn't matter to Death Lord as to whether this world was going to be destroyed or not. What Death Lord wanted to see was the art of the highest level. The realm that he wasn't able to reach. He just wanted to see Muyong enter that realm. As promised, I'll hand over everything of mine to you. Death Lord struck the ground with the staff that he was carrying from the darkness. At the same time, as his essence was gathered, his soul crossed over from the darkness, and entered into Muyong. PSSSSS. Death Lord's body turned to powder and scattered away. His room that was in the darkness has also vanished. Muyong opened his eyes. I feel rejuvenated. Although his body has been torn apart many times, he felt power as soon as opened his eyes. In fact, he felt even stronger than before. You are awake. It was inside Muyong's place, in the middle of Gremari's temple. The King of the Dead was there. Next to him was Crimson Balrog who, too, was looking at Muyong. They appeared quite happy, perhaps, as it was the effect of imprinting. However, speaking with the King of the Dead was the very first thing to do. The fact that Crimson Balrog was intact meant that Muyong was victorious from the duel. I've lost. The Crimson Balrog that you have created was beyond my imagination. However, it does not imply an acceptance of a complete defeat. Then what is the reason for you to be waiting for me to awake? Death Lord has said. By following you, I would understand my own inadequacies. So, I'll be following you until I come to that understanding. The King of the Dead volunteered to come forward even though Muyong did not say anything. An unexpected harvest. It meant the King of the Dead has surrendered. Muyong checked it again. I'm thinking about a full-scale war with the demon gods. Will you still follow me? Demon gods do not scare me. The King of the Dead said nonchalantly. As if he really did not fear the demon gods. He was truly a strong ally. Muyong spoke as he smiled. Welcome. One of the four transcendental beings. Chapter 269. It was the moment the king of the dead, the master of the north, has joined Muyong. The king of the dead. The word about him, having left the northern territory and gone to war, spread quickly. Especially, the remaining transcendental beings were the first ones to learn of the news. Oh, king of the dragons! The dragon lord Han Sung. Han Dung met the king of the dragons in the Grand Garden, in the Western Territory. Bi Seungmin was next to him. An incredibly huge being raised its head and looked at Bi Seungmin. You've brought an unpleasant one. You are probably aware of the news about the king of the north having entered the war. I'd like to inform you that this person's master is the one whom the king of the north follows. I'm Bi Seungmin. Bi Seungmin displayed an appropriate decorum. At any rate, that was how much power the transcendental beings wielded. Especially, the king of the dragons. He was the ruler who could mobilize all dragons. He was the most powerful entity, among all the transcendental beings. However, the king of the dragons did not intervene in this world. Yet, after meeting Han Sung, the dragon lord, Bi Seungmin wanted to meet the king of the dragons. You must want me to enter the war with against the demon gods. Even without saying anything, the king of the dragons was already seeing right through him. He said it with certainty, deducing that there was no other reason for Bi Seungmin to pay him a visit. And Bi Seungmin, too, did not deny it. If you, the king of the dragons, were to enter the war, it would clearly be very helpful in putting the radical demon gods in their places. However, I seek balance, so I have a fundamental policy of not getting involved in this world. The balance has been destroyed a long time ago already. They want the annihilation of all the races, including the dragons. In short, unless he was to enter the war, it meant every race, including the high and mighty dragon race, would be annihilated. Although it was nearing a threat, the king of the dragon did not budge. I do not fear them. Larija, the dragon hunter, has fallen. My master has personally destroyed him. Larija, the demon god of war. He was also the demon god whose name was known as the dragon hunter. Muyong had condemned the one that was considered to be the archenemy of the dragons. Your master has annihilated Larija? That's strange. Even the king of all the dragons could not see the truth in such news. The original rumor was that Solomon had destroyed him, but that is not the truth. It was a fake rumor that my master had spread on purpose. It was a maneuver to bring confusion to the radical demon gods. Is there a proof to your story? Shaung. Bi Seungmin spun his staff, once, in the air. Then a magical field formed, and a huge arm appeared in the empty space. Tuyuk. The king of the dragons spoke after seeing the arm. That is Alarija's arm. This is the proof that my master has annihilated him. Just for a special occasion, this arm has been preserved. From the start of the hunt for Larija, Muyong was thinking about the king of the dragons. Hence, one of the arms was kept preserved, and that was what Bi Seungmin has displayed here. Oh, the king of the dragons. The threat that was hunting the dragons is no more. However, the radical demon gods continue to make threats whenever possible. My master wishes the support of the king of the dragons. I, too, beg you. Han Sung, the dragon lord, also knelt down on his knees. Bi Seungmin who suddenly appeared. And, after hearing Bi Seungmin, Han Sung wanted to join forces in aggressive manner. He has instinctively sensed the blowing wind. In that past, Han Sung also had the experience of standing at the forefront in the effort for the humanity's victory. If given a minute possibility for victory, he was ready to bet everything on it. The king of the dragons was quiet. The death of Larija was very pleasing to him. Furthermore, if it was Bi Seungmin's master who had killed Larija, he was ready to endow him with many gifts. However, not being able to decide readily was because there was risk. He needed to take his time and carefully consider over and over again. Then, Han Sung brought out several pieces of a sword from his coat. Oh, the king of the dragons, I was under orders to find the owner of this sword. Along with Shandalton, the dragon of light. Do you recall? I do. I had personally ordered you to locate the owner of that sword. And I've found him. However, his trace no longer exists. Meaning, the noble knight of glory has been murdered. By a very strong being, a being that is able to twist time and space, that is. I was only just able to recover a few artifacts that belonged to him. He then brought out the cracked armor suit. The king of the dragons quietly gazed down on it. There was a slight shaking in the king's eyes as he looked at it. He is dead? The honorable knight of glory. I did not know of his existence, but I've learned a few things during my investigation. I've found relevant literature by searching out wise men and going through their libraries. That is, the fact that he and the king of the dragons had a relationship. Hansung lowered his head even further. However, that knight is no longer living. I do not know what he had fought for, but I know of someone who is continuing on with his strength and mission. Speak. Who is it? Hansung spoke, pointing to Bi Seungmin. His master, Mweung, is continuing the legacy of the power of the Honorable Knight of Glory. Hansung did not stop speaking. We have to mobilize. Oh, King, we do not have much time. And it was also possible that the Honorable Knight of Glory might have been fighting against strong enemies in order to protect this world. The one who is continuing his legacy is in the middle of the battlefield. The King of the Dragons. His relationship with the Honorable Knight of Glory was very deep. Although Hansung did not mention it, the King of the Dragons was one of the beasts that had been nurtured by the knight. Since as his fate was to rule the dragons, he was watching the northern territory, yet the knight's death was also very sad to the King of the Dragons. Finally, the King of the Dragons came to a decision. Did you say Mweung? I shall meet him. The transcendental beings began to mobilize in earnest. Chapter 270. Chapter 258. A War with the Demon Gods, 1. Hansung, the Dragon Lord and Merlin. Their presence was highly symbolic. Hansung, a transcendental being and a representative of the humanity, and Merlin, the sorcerer and protector of the humanity, were gathering the people. On top of that, with the formal proclamation of Malalan's Great Alliance, it spread like wildfire, a feverish desire to overthrow the demon gods. And, even Kim Tae-won, who has risen to the position of the Vice-Guild Master of the Radiant Guild, was amongst the great host. This is truly a mighty force. Even many from Gunja province have joined. Seo Yunsi, the head of the commanders, is the real power. They are saying that even the ruling family of Malalan takes a step back from the commander's quiet orders. Wow, really pretty. No matter, still an old lady inside. SHH. SHH. You might be overheard. Everyone who was following Kim Tae-won was scolding the impertinent speaker at the same time. Walking at the front of them, Kim Tae-won surveyed the host for a while. I'll say roughly 3 million. 3 million. And that number was based only on those who were able to fight. This great number of people were marching over the hills. There has never been this many humans at one place in history. It was too simple. As if someone was manipulating it. However, the alliance formed very, very quickly this time around. As if everyone was under a spell, they all wanted to join the war with the demon gods. Was it Merlin's power? Or perhaps, because the Dragon Lord Hansung and Malalan have joined. But, leader, I've heard that it wasn't just us humans who were going to fight in this war. Breaking away from his thoughts, Kim Tae-won looked at the man who has approached him. He spoke quietly to the man with pronounced buck teeth. The Grand Sorcerer has said that this war wasn't just our war. So, does that means that everyone is gathering at a specific location within the demon god's territory? Could this be a trap? I also have a hard time believing that there will be good cooperation among the races that will meet each other for the first time. It was a reasonable doubt. The progress was going smoothly, but the problem was what happens later. Merlin, who has started the war with the demon gods, vowed to help wiping them out. I can't believe that the objective of the demon gods is to end every other life form. On top of that, Merlin also spoke several truths about this world. The proof of the demon gods' mobilization, and their unpreparedness to resist was one of them, as he pushed for quick response from humanity. It wasn't possible for the humanity to not mobilize. They have already been threatened several times by the sky demon. Rather than self-interest, a great cause and survival have become the highest priorities. As a result, cooperation came quickly. Furthermore, if the demon gods were truly mobilizing, they all knew that extinction was inevitable without humanity coming together. If what was said by the Grand Sorcerer was true, then there isn't much time. It cannot be untrue, since the Pope and Malalan have come to lead. More than anything, Malalan's leadership provided the major effort. The Pope, who abides by God's words, have declared a holy war, and sought support from the great city in Gunja province. He has also sent official notices to countless number of small cities in order to gather the people. An atmosphere, which caused one to be treated as a pariah should they not mobilize, or come join quickly, has been created. As if it was someone's script. Everyone was coming together like flowing rivers that merged at the sea. All this in less than a month. Tug. Stop. There came a signal from the front of the line. We'll be entering the demon god's territory. Everyone stay within the formation, and do not drop your guard. The demon god's territory. The place where the demon gods and the demon tribes were running rampant. It was still a mysterious place to humans, where every kind of monsters lived. It has become a forbidden place, where no one would enter. After many expeditions experienced total annihilation dozens of times in the past. Unless the expedition team was led by strong people, no one had dared to enter, until now. Damn, can't believe we're at the demon god's territory. If I should die first, make sure to bury me at a sunny place. They moved forward in a somber atmosphere. They were wary of the surroundings. No one dared to let down their guard. Although there wasn't any intel about the existence of threatening monsters around here, there was so little information about what could happen here. Especially like now. Quong. 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 The earth shook. Behind a great dust storm, something was rushing towards the expeditionary force. It wasn't just one or two bodies. They were easily over 10,000. Ready for battle. Ready for battle. Chong. Chung. Everyone took out their weapons. Even Kim Ti-wan held his great sword as he swallowed his own dry mouth. It looks like an elaborate welcoming party. That looks like a bolter, way at the front. A bolter? A fire giant? Great! Bolter were at the top of the food chain. It was a known story that the areas, near where the fire giant bolter resided, other species usually got decimated. Bolters had high intelligence, and as a result, they were known to be difficult adversaries. There, coming at them, were bolters numbered close to 10,000. Leader, leader! Are we going to get slaughtered as soon as we got here? Humanity becomes stronger when we come together. Kim Ti-wan let out a big breath. That was right. Humans become stronger the more they came together. It was also true that there would be more tactics available when people with specialized skills were assembled. That was certainly a difference from the other races or monsters. Humans would not be bound by the formula of 1 + 1 = 2. Therefore, they built cities after coming together. Certainly, if 3 million elite troops came together, they would certainly be able to face 10,000 bolters. Although suffering casualties was inevitable, it wouldn't be too difficult to push on forward. It was then. The bolters that were rushing came to a halt right before us. As the dust settled, there was blood all over their bodies. As if they have just come from a battle. Merlin! It's good to see you again. The bolter that was at the front called out Merlin's name. Then levitating up to meet the bolter's eyes, Merlin replied with smiles. Augur, sorry to have you come a long way. Haha. It's nothing. I've cleaned up the path that you are on, so it won't be too much trouble for you to keep going. By the way, there are so many humans. Augur looked at the humans. The average size of a bolter was about 10 m. The scene in which 10,000 of them have gathered has never before been seen by anyone who was here. Who represents the humans? Augur, laughing loudly, stepped forward. Flock. The Dragon Lord Hansung came down, riding Shandalton, the light dragon. He was wearing a golden helmet and armor for high visibility, and at his side were Shandalton and the demon dragon Akrisha, creating a sight to behold. I'm Hansung. A human has trained 2 dragons? Hey! And one is a dragon of light, that is known to be of high level and proud, and a demon dragon as well. The magic powers and levels of dragons were classified based on the age. Ancient dragons were at the peak. It was known that they were very rare, and one of them was stronger than 5 ordinary dragons. It was nearly impossible to train dragons, yet Hansung has trained 2 of them. I was lucky. I don't believe it was just a simple luck. At any rate. As Hansung replied humbly, Augur formally introduced himself, despite being impressed.